There we go. Okay, perfect. Because I'm going to get into really specific guidance on things that you can do. And you will have access to this PowerPoint, and then you'll have access to this recording if you want to go back and listen to it. And then, of course, it's unusual to have someone presenting on this topic. It's unusual to, to be able to delve into things like this, like someone who has been identified and diagnosed with DID, who's gone through a healing process, who's willing to tell you they have it, and then will also present on this topic. So I encourage you to ask questions, and you can do that in the chat. That'd be the easiest way. But if you want to, at some point, we can stop and we can unmute folks, and you can turn your camera on if you want, and we can have a discussion, because it's a nice size group today that would work. So I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So I'm going to share my screen. Okay, so this. Why is this so dark over here? Let's make sure I'm on the first. Okay, so why learn about DID? So I'm going to start here just to kind of ground us a little bit, and then I'll go. I won't spend too much time here, but just a little bit of time, and then I'll go into what you can do, because I just want to remind everyone that DID is it's a complex disorder for which we have been doing research for the past 4 decades. There are a lot of misconceptions and myths about the disorder, and that's actually just really unfortunate for people who have it, because what happens is some people don't believe in DID, or don't know anything about it, or the only things that people know are the stigmatized ways in which it's been presented on TV and in the movies. So, but I am actually typical for someone that has DID, but I am not stereotypical for someone who has DID. Stereotypical is what you see in television shows and movies, that I have a very disjointed, disrupted existence, or criminal, mass murder, serial rapist kind of situation. So that's not the norm. It's also, most documentaries have exploited and the symptoms of DID, rather than really kind of delving into what it is, what causes it, and what that means for people who have it. So there's a lot of myths and stuff. And unfortunately, it compromises that, because people don't know about it and don't believe in it, it compromises someone's medical and mental health care. And that's because it's hard to go to the doctor, but because you have it, it means that you've had extensive trauma in your past, and that can create all kinds of physical issues, health issues for someone, and of course, mental health issues for someone. So making sure that the clinicians that you're working with, the doctors that you're working with, nurses, clinics, all understand what it is, makes it a lot easier for people to take care of themselves, and physically and psychologically. And then why learn about DID? Because there's a lot of research on it. And so I kind of want to go through and identify some of the myths. And then I also have a lot of the research, a lot of research that I can send anyone who wants to learn more about it, or who wants to advocate about DID in their community. So some of the myths is that DID is a fad. That's a big thing going on right now. I actually find that interesting because most people don't really tell you if they have DID. Most people don't want to have DID. So to kind of like say it's a fad is kind of ridiculous to me. And then also it's a myth that DID is primarily diagnosed in North America by DID experts who overdiagnose the disorder. That's not true. DID has been diagnosed all over the world for very similar symptoms. And then also people think that DID is rare. It's actually not rare. And because you do this work around sexual violence, you know that that sexual violence is real, and that very few victims who have experienced sexual violence actually report the crime and actually go through any kind of criminal legal process. So for people who aren't steeped in this work, they don't realize how prevalent sexual violence is and how prevalent child sexual abuse and child physical abuse is. So that's why people think it's rare. But when you know that it comes up because someone had to try to figure out how to survive a situation that they couldn't physically get away from, and so they cognitively escape it. So people don't get that that's why people have DID. And so they don't realize, they don't like think that there's a lot of cases of child abuse. But we know that that's not the case, that a lot more people are abused than are ever identified and processed through our systems. So it's not rare. And the numbers that we have, we know, are very low considering what we think there really is. DID, so another myth is that DID is caused by diagnostic and therapeutic procedures undertaken by a patient rather than a trauma-based disorder. So that means basically that there's a myth that clinicians basically plant this idea in people's minds, and that's why they can diagnose people with DID. That's just not true. Another point is that DID, a lot of people think that DID is the same as borderline personality disorder. That is not true. DID, also people think that DID treatment is harmful to patients. It's actually, research shows that there is a protocol for working with people with DID. And if you follow that protocol, people will do better. People will report having less symptoms, less crisis, and that things calm down for them. And there is no research to substantiate any of these beliefs that are contained in these myths. And there's actually quite a bit of research that refutes these myths. So this is why we're spending so much time talking about DID. It's there, it's real. A lot of the people that you work with will have experienced a history of abuse. And if so, you might see signs of something, and I want you to know what it is so that you can help someone, in the way that you work with them. So what we think is that 1% to 3% of the US population has DID. Without some help, DID can create chaos and risk for the person that has it. And people who have it can experience additional challenges when in crisis. So either because of a new trauma or loss. And that's the key. And if you think about the past year and a half with the pandemic, that's a really risky time for people with DID. Getting sick, having to be hospitalized and not have a support person with you can be really damaging and re-traumatizing for people with DID. So someone like me, who I move through the world as though I'm one, because I have a lot of collaboration and cooperation inside with the parts that I have. If I were to get COVID and be hospitalized and not have my partner there, I could start to splinter. My parts could start coming apart and not working together anymore. And that would make life really difficult for me. So this is why I want you to know what it is, and that it's real. Okay, so what can you do? So I talked a little bit about this last time, but I'm going to really delve into it today. So and I'll repeat myself quite a few times, but I just want to make sure that you're able to take away some of the key points. So one, to learn more about DID, you want to learn about the facts and the fiction. And there's a good article that does that talks about what is real about DID and what are people saying. What are some of the myths about it and why those aren't true? And then learn about the impact that DID has on survivors and the healing process. I think that's important to learn what the healing process can look like. So that if you're working with someone who's in the process of healing, you have a sense of, what that might be like for them, how you can support them. Or if you're trying to find a clinician, that if someone asks you for a referral to a clinician, if you're trying to find one, you have a sense of what that should look like. I want you to share what you know with colleagues, multidisciplinary team members, people in your community, family members, whoever you think it would be useful for, and for survivors, so they understand what DID is. And so maybe they might find themselves in it, which is really helpful if they have it to start getting information about it. Now, I'm not saying that I want you to start telling people that you think they have it. And I mean, survivors that you work with, I don't want you to start telling people that you think they have them. That's not the role that you would have. It's to answer questions. If people say to you, this is happening to me, or I've heard about DID and I'm wondering if I have that. But not to try to diagnose people or tell people that's what's going on for them. And then to help people who have DID to be proactive. And I'll discuss that a little bit more. So what you can do also depends on what your role is. So if you're a mental health practitioner, and I talked about this last week because we talked about the healing process, but if you're a mental health practitioner, in your work with clients, I want you to listen really carefully and then listen for what could be DID. So we talked about that as being someone that has gaps in their memory that is not normal forgetting. Someone that might have gotten triggered by a scene of sexual violence, who don't remember ever experiencing anything like that. A person that seems to lose track of time or space, meaning that they'll wake up maybe on a Monday in Atlantic City, but not remember how they got there. Or they have gaps of like a month or a week or a couple hours or years. That's all kind of things to listen for and consider whether DID is a possibility. So because DID is actually something that you can heal from, and you don't necessarily need medication for DID. In fact, there isn't really medication for DID. There's people will take medication for depression and anxiety that's associated with DID. But it's the kind of, if you're going to have a significant mental health disorder, DID is actually a good one to have because we know it helps. And when you go through that process of healing, you can live your life really fully without, having to take medication all the time, or without, like being able to move on, if that makes any sense. So it's actually something that we know what to do to help people. And then the other thing is, if you're a clinician and you do trauma work, but you want to work with people with DID, which there just aren't enough clinicians that do this work. If you want to get training and supervision, and the first place I would go to look for that is the International Society for the Study of Trauma and Dissociation. And I have their website on this slide. It's isst-d.org. And let me just say, there are very few clinicians of color that work with people with DID. I mean, first of all, there's very few clinicians that work with people with DID. It's growing, but it's still not enough. And there are much fewer clinicians of color that work with people with DID. So another thing that I would recommend is, if you do work with people with DID, to basically recruit, to supervise, to uplift, to bring in clinicians of color and help them develop the skill of working with people with DID, support them. Like really, this is one thing that's really important in our field, is to have more clinicians of color that are working on trauma and dissociation. So that's just something to think about. Okay, so the other thing that we talked about last week, and then again, I'm going to cover a little bit today, is everyone should learn about the healing process, but especially clinicians. And so I'm just going to go over this very, very quickly. So what the research shows is that people with GID are generally unresponsive and actually may deteriorate if someone that just knows trauma treats them. Because the way that you treat trauma, if you're an adult with that has experienced trauma as an adult, is it's a combination of cognitive behavior therapy with exposure therapy. So it's like a desensitization and cognitive behavior therapy, so that eventually minimizes your reaction to what's caused you trauma. But for people with DID, that actually makes things worse. So it's really important to refer people not to trauma therapists, but to therapists that work with trauma and dissociation. And so what research shows is that a phase-oriented treatment improves DID. And it doesn't mean that it gets rid of people's parts, or it makes a person that is plural be singular. That's not how it works. It's that the parts inside, there might be some parts that only had the purpose of taking the abuse, and those parts might decide that they don't need to be there anymore, or can fade into the background. But the purpose is to get the parts that are there to meet each other, to share what happened, and to work together. That's the goal. So it's so that that person has a narrative of their whole lives. So the way that treatment involves stages, and the stages I talked about last time, again, are the initial focus on safety and stability. then containment and processing of trauma, and then integration, but not integration like get rid of all your parts, but more integrate those experiences of trauma so it feels like that happened to you. And then rehabilitation, which is learning how to live in the world with parts and with the knowledge of what happened to you, because that's a whole different reality than what someone has had. So this is the process that research shows helps. And if you want to go in deeper on this, the session that I did last week, I go into it pretty much in a lot of detail. And there's some videos in there as well. So you'll be able to access that through NC Casa. And there's 2 videos you can access. One that I did as a standalone that's about 35 minutes that I talk about the healing process, or you can access the webinar that I did last week, which I go through. That's an hour and a half, and I go through that process and I answer a few questions. So, okay, so those are all resources for you to be able to use and refer back to. I also have some on my website, which I have at the end. My website's really easy. It's olgatrujillo.com. Okay, so let's talk really quickly about what you can do in the community. And then I'm going to talk about how you can work with survivors. And a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about is going to be really validating for you, because I'm sure a lot of you already do this. So, okay, what can you do in your community? So train people about DID and what it means for their work. You can use the videos that the NC Casa has that I've done that are standalone videos about these different aspects of DID. The first one is about what DID is from a lived experience, what it feels like to have it. The second one is DID and the healing process. And then the third one is what it means for your work. This webinar itself is actually going to go into more detail than that video did, but still you have access to those. You can use those in trainings if you'd like. The second, and so I'm providing, and I'm going to provide PowerPoints to Leah. I'm also going to send her a bunch of handouts. We've talked about it. The other thing is keep it simple when you're doing these kinds of information sessions or trainings. Just let people know DID exists. Here are people that have it. There are some good YouTube videos of people who have DID talking about it. Talk about, so anyway, just keep it really simple. Don't go too far into the weeds. You don't really need that. Give people a place to go if they should come across someone who has it. So it might be a clinician in your area that they can refer someone to. It might be you who could work as an advocate with that person. And then you can always reach out to me to say, here we have a person, we're not sure how to help them. And I'll try to help out to the extent that I can. But keep it really simple. Talk about what dissociation looks like and sounds like so that people will start recognizing the signs. And I've talked about that, right? And you know this, it's a flat look. It's someone talking in a very, very scattered manner. Someone who is talking about really awful things, but in a very flat, monotone way. Someone who can't remember what happened to them and has real blocks of time that has been lost. Those are all signs. Someone who seems to change dramatically or can't remember blocks of time today. So those are just some of the keys for what it looks like. In the first video, I talk a little bit about what it looks like, what it sounds like, but these are just some elements of it. And then talk about, so when you're working with community folks or multidisciplinary folks or colleagues at your program, talk about how you all need to work together in order to help this person. But also, if you're working with someone that has DID and you're trying to help them while kind of pull it together to work with you, you can talk to them about, that you can work with them, but we're going to all need to work together. So never talk to people's parts unless they talk to you first. But you can, if the person has told you that they have DID, you can reference the fact that they have parts. And you can say things like, okay, so this is going to be hard, but I think we're going to be able to do it if we all work together. And that means if you guys work together and if the parts inside work together. And then help people in your community and people who you work with, and also survivors, understand what to do. So let me break that down. So people in your community, if you're doing outreach and engagement around DID, so what it is, what it feels like, what the healing process is like, then also talk about what services there are in your community and how they can help people that have DID. It might be referring them to you. It might be referring them to this clinician. It might be, I mean, those are actually two really good options. But then also helping people understand that, okay, the fact that they have DID does not mean they're different than they were before they knew they had DID. This is just more information that they have about them. They're the same person that they were before they knew they had DID. Now they're that same person, but now they have more information about their life and who they are. And that I think really is helpful. I'm also going to send Leah some information about DID that you can use to educate folks in your program, the folks that you work with in your community, and also people who have DID. Okay, so that's what you can do in your community. Now let's talk about what you can do working with survivors. Okay, and then let me just check, Leah, are we good? Are there any questions in the chat?
No questions so far.
Okay, awesome. All right, so the key to success, and this is of course not going to surprise you because you do this already, is that you need to create an accessible space for people who have DID. And what I mean by an accessible space is that you need to have physical safety, you need to address physical safety, and you need to address emotional safety. Okay, so let's break that down. All right, when you're creating physical safety, you're looking at the physical environment. You want to think about, like, does this feel safe to people? Meaning, can anybody get to them that they're afraid of? And also, it may mean, like, how does this environment feel? So is it loud? Is it chaotic? Are there people that feel unsafe to a survivor? If they were recently abused, or even if they're dealing with past abuse, does that person still have access to them? And under what conditions do they have access to them? And what can you do? What does the survivor want to do about that, the fact that that person has access to them? Who has access to that survivor's information? Because that's also can compromise safety, especially with something as stigmatized as dissociative identity disorder. So you want to kind of explore those. Are the people that you are working with, so if they're in healthcare, if they're like basically getting care for a medical condition, does the hospital or the clinic feel safe to them? Does the doctor believe in DID? Does the nurse, who are the healthcare providers? Do they understand what this person's challenges are? Do they understand what DID is? And a lot of times survivors don't want to tell people that they have it. So recognizing they might not want people to know they have DID. So then what can you tell? How can you work with the survivor to determine what do they want to tell the other professionals in your community that they might have to work with about what's the challenge? Almost everyone that has been diagnosed with DID has also been diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. So that might be what they decide that they tell people. I have post-traumatic stress disorder. So these things are hard for me. Can we do things this other way? Or that might be a way if they want you to help them talk to people, that might be what they feel more comfortable with. And then the question is to look at how are survivors treated by people in their family, investigators, other advocates, and other survivors participating in your program. So those are the key things that you kind of want to focus on for physical safety. I think actually physical safety is the easiest to address because it's mostly stuff you can see. All right, but then let's delve into emotional safety. Now, a lot of you do this all the time. So again, this is not going to be like super different for you. It should be just validating what you already do. So remember that emotional safety is intertwined with physical safety, but it goes further. So a lot of the things that we talked about in terms of physical safety also address emotional safety, like how loud the room is, how chaotic, how much there is to look at around this person. So how closed in it is. That determines someone will feel that physically as well as emotionally. But then we're going to go further into it because a lot of your work with people that have DID is going to center around emotional safety. So here are some things to think about when building a situation, building a relationship that's emotionally safe. One is you want to build rapport. And in order to build good rapport with the survivor, with DID in particular, it's not going to be a whole lot different, but a little bit. So you need to be patient. You need to build trust. And in order to build trust, you have to be transparent. So in order to be transparent, you have to pay attention to what you're doing and what you're saying. And when those things don't match up, because everybody does it, everybody says they're going to do something, and then they do something that's a little different. And someone who's experienced trauma is going to notice the difference between what you said and what you did. And if you don't address it, then that's going to be one thing that they see that starts to erode their trust in you. And it might not be a big deal, but several of those, then the person can decide you're not trustworthy and they withdraw or pull back. So it's very important to pay attention to what you say and what you do and make sure that those match up. And if they don't match up, to address it. Okay. All right. Remember that people have been telling them that they are a problem or hard forever. Whether they say it or act like it, they are expecting you to say and do things that show them that they are difficult to work with, difficult to be around, or hard. So you want to keep that in mind because that skews the way they hear and see what you say and do. All right. So what else can you do? You need to plan for more time when you're working with people who've experienced trauma, and in particular, people with DID. It's hard to process everything. So I had DID. I was diagnosed when I was 31. I have been walking through the world as if I'm one since I was 36. So I'm 60 now. So for the past 24 years, am I doing the math right? I have been moving through the world as though I'm one. I do it pretty naturally now. I don't have to think about it. I do think about it because I do trainings and stuff, so I pay really close attention to it. But when I have a lot going on, or things are kind of hard, or I'm not feeling well, my processing slows down. So I might be having a conversation with you, but it might not be till later till I can fully process all the things you said. So if you go slower, it'll be easier for someone to process what you're saying and what you're doing. And one thing I'll just say, so plan for more time. And if you can help it, don't rush. That's a really hard thing for people with DID to do. It's stressful. Like I said, it takes more time to process things. So people get frustrated and irritable, and they can switch and have a protective part come up who can be really hard to work with. So if you, to the extent possible, try very hard to plan extra time and not rush. Okay, keep things simple. Try not to do too many complex things all at the same time. Again, dissociation and having parts and being in crisis really slows down someone's ability to process things. So if you keep it simple, where someone like me is more likely to follow what you're doing and to be able to work with you. Limit chaos to the extent possible. So let me explain this a little bit. I think we all know this, but let me explain why this is so important. So someone who experienced violence in childhood, who has DID, has spent their entire life, just about, from the time that they experienced that violence, that trauma, assessing for danger. So it is their norm to constantly be paying attention to what's going on around them to assess for danger. Some things that aren't really dangerous to other people will feel dangerous to someone like me that's experienced violence forever. And so then I'm going to have more heightened sense of what's going on around me. And at the same time that I'm doing that, I'm trying to pay attention to the work that you and I are doing together. I'm trying to build trust with you, like listen to you and watch you so that I know whether I can trust you or not. I'm trying to listen to the things that you have to say, to gather the information that I need for me. But the problem is if there's a lot going on around us, then the energy that it takes for me to assess whether any of those things are dangerous takes away from the energy that I have to do the work with you. And so I'm less likely to absorb the things that I need to learn from our work together. I'm less likely to remember it. I'm going to get agitated because the more and more things are chaotic, the more and more it's going to feel unsafe to me. And that's the piece of where physical safety and emotional safety come together. Chaos can feel physically unsafe to someone like me. Whereas a quieter area can feel more safe physically to me as well as emotionally. So it doesn't mean that chaos is dangerous for people. It just means that someone like me will find sitting in a situation that's chaotic as unsafe. So I'm hoping that that distinction makes sense. The other thing is you want to repeat things as often as needed. So this is where patience is really important. I may not pick up everything that you say up front because I'm trying to absorb too much, or I might switch. And you won't necessarily notice if I switch, but then if I switch to a part of me that didn't have that information, then I'm going to need you to repeat it. But I don't even know I'm asking you to repeat it. I might just be asking you that same question again. And I might even get frustrated because I don't have the information and you think that you gave it to me, which of course you did, but that I don't remember that. So be really patient. Try really hard not to get frustrated, because this isn't about that. This is that someone is working within a system inside and trying to gather the information that you're providing. So repeat things as often as needed. And then the other thing is to provide information in different modes of learning. So I've been doing that a little bit in our training. I provide you information. I tell you information. I give you a PowerPoint with a visual to help you be able, for those of you who like to, absorb things, learn things through reading. I provided videos for you, for those of you that do better following a visual. And if we were together, I would walk you through it. So, because people learn in different ways, but also someone like me will forget. And I can't always comprehend what I'm reading. So if you only give me something in writing, I may not be able to comprehend it until much later when things calm down for me. But if you walk me through it, I'm more likely to remember it. If you use videos, I'm more likely to remember it and retain it, like understand it and retain it. If you give me information in writing, then later, like a week later, when things calm down for me, I might be able to go back to what's in writing to remember what I'm supposed to be doing. And then if you use drawings, or what in Latino culture we talk about fotonovelas, which are, different, like almost comic book, graphic novel type ways of expressing things, then that's something, it's a great way to do things, because you don't have to worry about literacy. You don't have to worry about language as much. It's much easier to follow. So those are really good ways to get information to people. And I would recommend using as many of those as possible. So let me give you another example. Doctors do this all the time. So when I go to the doctor and I'm having problems with my back, my doctor will either pull out a skeleton with the nerves and stuff there and the muscles and show me what's going on that model, or he'll pull up something on his computer to show me what's going on, where it's affecting, and then he'll walk me through it. He'll have me stand up and show me like how the pain that I'm experiencing in my body is showing up on this model, or this on this visual on the computer. And then at the end of our visit, he'll print out something for me to take home so that I know what I'm supposed to do with that. So he'll walk me through it. Sometimes he'll use videos if they're helpful. Most of the time he'll use a diagram or a model of the part of the body that I might be struggling with. So I am more likely to remember that and be able to really kind of do what I need to do. So this is a really good thing to incorporate into your work with survivors with DID. The next thing that you can do, this is super easy, and this applies. Let me just stop right here for a second and say, the stuff that I'm telling you that's really helpful for people with DID is actually universal for people who are neurodivergent. So people who have mental health disabilities, who are autistic, people who have Down syndrome, people with disabilities, cognitive and intellectual disabilities, this is all very helpful. It just happens that the same kinds of stuff helps across the board. So another thing that you can do is help someone create a checklist. The checklists are really, really helpful, especially with DID, because if you forget, if you switch and all of a sudden you don't remember what you're supposed to do, having information in a checklist or having someone write things down or draw or giving them drawn instructions helps them to remember what to do. So you can have a conversation with them if they know they have DID. If you are talking with them around what happens when a part comes or when they switch, then having a checklist, having written instructions, having planners or calendars or notebooks where they write what they need to do next or information that they want to share from one part to another is very, very helpful. For situations where you work in an environment that is chaotic and you're not able to work somewhere else, then providing noise canceling headsets or having sound machines in and around your area might be a way to go to help that person to be able to focus and work with you in that environment. Okay, so a great thing for people who are neurodivergent and people who have DID is to be structured. This is so helpful. I cannot tell you enough how helpful this is. I live my life in a routine because it makes things so much easier for me. My partner, on the other hand, does not live her life in a routine. So as long as my routine is fairly basic, I can interact and support her without a routine because my routine kind of gives me the structure to be able to then adapt to other things. I don't know if this makes any sense to you, but like you can be structured and in a routine and still be flexible. So I might wake up like around the same time every day and I get up and I brush my teeth and I go to the bathroom and then I go feed the dogs. This is a routine that provides structure for me, especially in the mornings where I might have heightened anxiety. My partner could wake up 15 minutes before she has to be somewhere and she's done, out, gone. And that's stressful for me to try to do. So within my routine, I can be supportive of her because I have this routine that I rely on. If I all of a sudden had to pop up, or if I got up and then in 15 minutes, I have to leave, I'm going to have a really hard time with that. And I'm going to struggle with that. So structure makes things as predictable as possible. It helps the survivor know what to expect. Creating routines in the way that you work with that survivor makes them more and more comfortable in your work together because there's a predictability to it. And it also helps them when things aren't predictable because they have a structure that keeps things that are predictable kind of in the norm, and then they can be flexible to address unpredictable incidents. So one of the things that you can do is to help survivors create routines. So simple things like, so let's say you're working with a survivor who has to go to court. So you might meet with the survivor let's say the court hearing is in a month, and you might meet with them once a week until that court hearing, and you might meet them at the same place and you go through. So let's say you're going to go to the courtroom ahead of time so they can get comfortable with it. So you meet them at the same corner, you go in the same entrance, you go through the metal detectors, you take the same elevator, you go up to the floor where the courtroom is, you go and you sit down roughly in the same area. That makes it much easier for someone on the day when they need to appear there in court to do that. So that's creating a routine that will make it easier for them in the future. Okay, but within that structure, you also need to be flexible. So survivors with mental health disability often experience decreased stamina and or fatigue. And so providing a flexible schedule is really important. Taking periodic breaks is really important, and breaking down tasks. And this is where the checklist comes in, right? If you break down a task into different pieces, they can do each one and check them off, and they can break it up during the day. So also to normalize that it's okay to be fatigued, that it's normal to feel this way. This is not you. This is what happened to you. You know, this is the impact of what happened to you. This is not you being lazy or anything else. This is your body physiologically reacting to what happened to you. So that really helps people a lot to be more gentle on themselves. All right, so let's keep going here. And I'm assuming, Leah, that you'll jump in if there's a question, right?
Yes, everything so far, though, I keep hearing you say, I hope that makes sense. It makes sense to me. This is really helpful.
Oh, awesome. Great. Thanks, Leah. Okay, so people are going to get triggered. You're not always going to know what's going to trigger them. So, and I'm sure a lot of you know this and you're already doing this. So plan for triggers. So talk with survivors about challenges that they experience. When do they happen? How do they come about? What helps them when those challenges come up? And then have a conversation about what you can do to help. Now I'm saying challenges, but what I'm talking about for the most part, it could be anything, but what'll happen is that someone will experience something that feels, smells, sounds, or looks like a component of what happened to them. And then they'll experience a flashback, and that can look a whole bunch of different ways, but they'll be gone in the past back to an incident that happened to them. And so they could either be completely withdrawn and you don't feel like they're there anymore. It could be that they're hysterical. It could be that they're very distant and angry and difficult to work with, difficult to talk to. So if any of those things, so that's kind of what you want to have a conversation about. When does that happen? For some people, it happens when they're in an elevator because they feel closed in. So then it might be that you got to take the stairs if they're able to. Or it might be that in a court that you ask for an accommodation not to take the public elevators, but to take one of the judicial elevators that are rarely crowded. And that's a request that you can make. It's an unusual request, but you can make that request and they can call up to the courtroom, to the judge's office, and ask if they can bring somebody up who is unable to come up the stairs, but also unable to get in the elevators because they're too crowded. And I've done that before. So I really urge you to talk to your court personnel about this as an accommodation, because elevators are a big trigger for people who've been sexually abused and sexually assaulted, as I'm sure you know. So have these conversations with folks and plan for how it is that you can help them. So one, it could be planning in ways that you might be able to avoid the triggers. But then some triggers they're not going to know about. And so then you should plan on what to do if they get triggered. And in that situation, it's usually a grounding technique that you're going to need to use. Now, that survivor may have some that work for them, but just in case something happens before you have this conversation, what you want to do is practice grounding techniques. So learn about them and practice them before you need them. And I have some information that I can send about different grounding techniques that you can use. But some common ones that help is engage the senses. So asking someone who might be withdrawn to like kind of check in, can they hear you? Or, you know, and then say, you know, I know you're having a hard time. I'm going to try to help you come back. And so could you look around the room and just name 3 objects that are square, or 4 objects that are red, or 2 yellow things that you see? Like, you can ask people to identify things through the shapes and colors that they see. You can ask people to, you can have something for someone to hold, and ask them, you know, can they describe what it is that they're holding, things that they can smell, things that they can hear. The easiest one is if they can see, if they have vision and they have good vision, to talk about things that they see in the room. So the other thing you can do, if you have this conversation with them and they are recently traumatized or recently re-traumatized, what you can do is have them develop a grounding kit that they keep with them. So, and things that they can have are essential oils that they can smell, or lip balm that they like the smell of, that they can feel and they can use, gum that they like, a rock or pebble or coin or something small that they can hold on to. And those are things that they can use when they're worried that they're going to get triggered, or when they're under high stress. And then one other thing that really helps is support dogs, emotional support dogs. Those are really helpful for people to stay grounded. They can focus on the dog in the here and now instead of being caught up in a flashback. So you can ask them about the dog, how the dog's fur feels, you know, what the dog looks like. You can focus it all there. The only key there is, you know, just checking in with the person before suggesting an emotional support animal during a proceeding or during work that you're doing with them, just to make sure that trauma doesn't, their trauma doesn't include animal abuse, because that can itself be a trigger. Okay, so, so I'm going to start moving now into safety planning. Okay, so I have some ideas of what you can do in terms of safety planning, and it's not really hard. It's really
Olga,
similar. Yeah, Leah.
So before you move on, someone put in the chat, grounding training would be beneficial. We use grounding in our healing circles. I would definitely be interested in learning new techniques.
Oh, awesome. Yeah, so I have created a list of different grounding techniques. And what I'll do is I'll send that to you, Leah. And, you know, we have a few more webinars coming up. And so if you want me to take some time during one of those webinars to go through that list, I can do that. So we can talk about that.
Sure, that sounds great. Yeah, maybe we can take like the first 5 minutes at the beginning or at the end to either practice them or for you to go through that. That would be great.
Okay.
Thank
Sounds
you.
awesome. Yeah, that's a great comment. So when you're doing safety planning, again, it's really important to repeat things as often as needed and keep it simple. So safety planning with someone who has DID, who still might be having a lot of switching, you're gonna want to create steps and then have them go someplace to get the next piece of information. So meaning that you can either create a checklist for them and or that they do together, that you do with them. And then they do the first thing, and then there's the next step. But if they can't have that checklist with them, for some reason that might compromise their safety, then what you can do is set up people that they can text when they've done the first thing, so that they get information around, okay, what's the next thing that they should do now? Because if you give someone a whole plan, and you can give them a whole plan, but don't expect that they're going to remember the whole thing if they're switching. So that's why keeping it simple, breaking down the steps. It's important to talk about what happens when they dissociate, help them, learn how to ground themselves, and, using that grounding kit. Talk about with them. This is that conversation again, where you're not talking two parts, but you're asking that person if all the parts inside can work together to make sure that you are able to keep yourself safe. So it's a conversation that if that person knows they have parts and they have, oops, sorry, that went too fast. If that person knows they have parts and they've been talking to you about not being able to remember, this is a conversation you can have. Don't have that kind of conversation with someone who does not know they have parts. Okay, that's really important. Okay, and then be willing to do this work with them over and over again. So this is the routine. Creating routine becomes the way they do things. And that's because of neuroplasticity. So the brain can be rewired. And that's what we do when we start a new hobby, when we try to eat a different way, when we're trying to change habits. If we do the same thing over and over again, eventually that is the way you will do it. That is the way you will think about it. So keep things simple and keep doing the same thing over and over again. So let's say the safety plan that you have is, if they feel unsafe, they're going to leave the house. Like, say that they need to go to the grocery store, or go to the next door neighbor or something. And then the next step is for them to text you. So then that's what they remember. And then they text you, and they're gonna, and then you're gonna text them to help them remember what the next step is. So it's breaking things down and then giving them a place to go for the next information. All right, so hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so in terms of accessing safety, if you're in a dual program that is a shelter-based domestic violence program, the way that domestic violence programs are traditionally set up are not accessible for people with DID, and for lots of reasons. One, you can't sleep in a room with someone you don't know. So sharing a room isn't going to help. In fact, it's going to kick things up, and that person's going to feel more unsafe. So if the shelter has single rooms that a survivor can use if they have DID, the person has to be able to lock the bathroom door or lock the door in the shelter in order to feel safe, in order to be able to sleep. Some people cannot sleep in a bedroom. Some people cannot sleep at night. So to have flexibility about where people can sleep is important. And then to know that people with DID, for the most part, will sit back and watch before they start to engage. And because what they're doing is they're trying to get comfortable, trying to figure out what's going on around them and what feels safe. And so they're trying to ride under the radar. It feels unsafe to start reaching out, to talk to like engage until they understand like what's happening in that environment. And so what you find a lot of times is someone who doesn't seem to be engaged in the program. And a lot of times people like me don't know that we're supposed to be the ones engaging with the advocates, and we wait for advocates to engage us, and then we skew what we think is going on. And I've come across this a lot in programs, in dual programs in particular, where I'll have gone to a program and done focus groups with participants, and then I'll meet someone whose experience is exactly that. And that's happened over and over and over again. And it also matches my experience of when I'm in a new situation, I will observe most of the time until I'm comfortable, and then I'll try to engage, but I'll be waiting for someone to engage me. So I'll have, and I've had experiences where I've been at programs where the survivors are telling me that the advocates don't like them and don't want to work with them because they're not being engaged. And the advocates are thinking that that person is just using the shelter as a homeless situation rather than because of domestic violence or sexual assault. When in fact, what it is that they're waiting to be engaged. They're observing. So that's a really important thing. And that's what I mean here by the fact that they might withdraw. So look for someone who seems withdrawn and then gently engage them. The other piece is there's a lot going on in someone's head when they have DID. There's lots of, I talked about, for me, it always felt like thoughts, but it can feel like white noise, lots of thoughts. So it's hard to then figure out what you're doing in a communal living situation. It's hard to be able to reach out to someone and say, I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing, because you're trying to calm everything down in your head. So keeping that in mind is also really important, that there's a lot going on in someone's head. So approaching them, keeping things simple, trying to accommodate the fact that they might not be able to share a room, that they might need to lock the door, that they might not be able to sleep at night, being flexible to accommodate those restrictions, those limits on how they can be there. And then again, learning grounding techniques, practicing them so that you can use them. Okay, so now I want to talk through some questions that this is a really good way to approach people who have DID and also people with mental health disabilities, people who are neurodivergent. So it's asking them questions about needs. And these are just examples of things that you can ask. Is there anything we can do to help you while you're here? If they disclose help, then figure out whether they need to tell others. So if they tell you that they have mental health issue, if they tell you they have DID, let's say they're working with you and they tell you they have DID and they are in a criminal justice process, and then you can talk with them about whether they want to tell the investigator or the prosecutor that they have DID or PTSD. What's the benefit and what are the pros and cons of doing that? What are the ramifications of doing that? So helping them think that through is really important. If they want to tell others, is there anything that you can do to support them in doing so? Another question you can ask, it can get noisy and busy around here. If you think that will be a problem for you, what can we do to help? These are really good ways to approach, and this is actually a really good way to approach someone who's withdrawn, to try to figure out what is behind the fact that they're not engaging with advocates. Other questions that you can ask are, I provided you with our medication policy. Do you have any concerns about what it says? And this is a conversation to have with them about medications if they have them. And, in other aspects, so you can pull out medication policy. You can say, I provided you with the policy that we have around, working with sexual assault survivors in our domestic violence program, or whatever policies you might have. Or I've talked to you about kind of what restrictions we have about people coming in and out late at night, or, is there any concerns that you have about that? If you have any concerns about your medications, or if you feel that they're not working properly, feel free to talk with one of us and we can try and help. A lot of people with DID who have been diagnosed will have medication, and it won't be necessarily for DID, it'll be for some of the ancillary aspects like depression, anxiety. And so that kind of medication may and may not work at times when there's high stress. So that's a nice way of having conversations like that. Another one is, I know that medications can have some side effects, like making you tired or feeling sick. If there's anything we can do to help you manage these, can you let us know? These are really great types of open-ended questions to have with survivors. Okay, so another thing that you can do is you can help survivors be proactive. All right, and so here's what I mean about that. So for people that have DID, it can be really, really helpful if they know they have DID to have a card in case of emergency. And I have cards like this. This one in particular was developed in the UK, but I have language and cards that you can take. It would be really helpful if you put your logo on it. And then if you're working with someone who has DID, who may come across might go into the emergency room, or might come across law enforcement or something, those situations can be really triggering for someone, and then they could end up switching. So having them be proactive about having a card, and then who should they call? Like, so the card can say, I have DID, here's what it is. Please, my name is so-and-so, and please call so-and-so. And when there's a phone number. So you can do something like that to help clients feel more comfortable with the fact that if they are re-traumatized and are having a hard time, that they have something that they can hand someone that will let them know what they're dealing with and who and how they can help them. So, so you can discuss with people who have DID and plan. So what kinds of things could happen that could create a crisis for them? So for me, for example, I was talking about if I got COVID-19 and I had to go to the hospital and my partner couldn't be with me, that would be really hard for me. Why do they want, who do they want involved to help them? So whose number should be on there that you want either the medical or the law enforcement or someone else to call? Create a card that's similar to this one. Like I said, I have language that I can send. And this is an option if that person wants people to know, and then who is it that they want to have contact them. Okay, so moving through the world is really important. And like I said, I'm not whole, but I have learned to move through the world as if I'm whole, or as if I'm one. So in order to help someone do this, you want to plan ahead. And in planning ahead, you want to think about as much as possible to prepare and make things very, very predictable. That makes it much easier for people to do them. Limit stimulation to the extent that you can. Give people things in different modes of communication. Talk about trauma-related issues and how you'll handle them. Now, if you're helping someone in a legal proceeding, you want to talk about the fact that it's inherently triggering. Being in an adversarial system is triggering for people who have DID. Because you're in a situation where you're saying something happened to you and you now have to prove it, where people are looking at you and trying to determine whether you're telling the truth or not. It's a match for child sexual abuse. So you want to talk about the fact that it's inherently triggering and help the person plan for triggers, and then talk about grounding techniques. Explore whether, if they are in a legal proceeding, explore with the attorney on the case whether a video testimony is a possibility or not, so that your client doesn't have to be in the same room with someone who hurt them or in a system that can be triggering. Prepare early for legal proceedings. Like, don't wait till the last minute or don't wait for like a week before the trial or hearing or whatever to help the survivor be able to attend and get there. And again, make it as predictable as possible. Predictability is so key to working with people with DID, helping them learn what to expect. Don't do like last minute surprises, very hard. And then finally, plan for triggers. See, I'm repeating myself quite a bit. Encourage a person to bring with them a supportive person. Consider having support animals or service animals. And then again, learn how to do grounding techniques. Talk with survivors about a grounding kit. Help them learn how to ground themselves. And then I'm going to end on this note, which is people who have DID are incredible. It is a superpower. I mean, if you think about it, it enables a person to survive something really traumatic and survive it, and oftentimes continue to live their lives very well. It's not the DID that's the problem. It's what happened to them that they had to develop DID to survive it. That's the problem. And it's important for people to understand that because it's hard to be an adult and to realize that you have DID, that you can't control everything around you, like that what's happening inside you varies depending on what's going on around you. And so that's hard enough. But if you approach people from this perspective of what you have done to survive something really awful is really incredible. You should be proud of the fact that you were able to do this, because they wouldn't be alive if they hadn't been able to do this. So anyway, so I'll stop there. So Leah, any questions, comments, anything?
Nothing right now, but I would love to hear from folks if you have questions or if you're thinking about how to apply this to your own work and at your own organization, wherever you may be at. That would be great. And I know Olga's happy to share their expertise.
Absolutely. So while we're waiting to see if anybody has anything, I'm gonna send you some resources this week. So I don't know if you're gonna have like if you're gonna send out an email for people to access this recording plus the other ones, but I'll send you the PowerPoints, and then I'll send you these resources, and people are welcome to have them.
Yeah, that's perfect. You actually read my mind. I was telling Alexandra earlier that after this session, I'll send out all of the recordings from these, plus your other videos, plus all your resources, and it can just be one big packet. And then there are two more. I always want to call them episodes, but like these are trainings. There's two more trainings.
Yeah,
in this
two
series.
more trainings.
And they're going to be
In
more
my series.
yeah, more episodes. They're going to be specific to working with survivors in the medical advocacy context and in the legal advocacy context. And so I think that that will also be really helpful, because I have heard, and I've heard from some of the work Olga has done too, some of your other trainings that I've been to, how a lot of times survivors with DID will go to the hospital, and rather than getting medical care, they end up committed to the psych ward.
Yeah.
And obviously that's further re-traumatizing. So I think that one will be really helpful.
Cool. Thanks, Leah.
Anything from anybody else?
Always feels like a black hole.
I know. I like how with it might be WebEx, there's one platform where you can see when people are typing. I wish Zoom had that, so you could know if someone's
I
typing a
know.
question or not.
That would be so nice. Yeah.
Oh, good. Thank you for this information. It has been helpful and will be resourceful.
Oh, awesome. Cool. Perfect. Well, and it'll be, so if you have questions down the road, you'll have my contact information, but also we're doing a couple more. I think we're doing 3 more, right? We're doing creating community for adult survivors of child sexual abuse.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's in 2 weeks. And then we're doing one on healthcare after violence and trauma-informed legal advocacy.
Yes, that is correct. Our next one will be on November 4th.
Okay.
And I don't know if Alexandra, you can put the link in the chat to that one to register.
I can. Let me just pull it up.
Okay, cool. So Alexandra will put the link to register to that one in the chat if folks want to do that. And after she puts that in there, then I guess we will end for the day. But thank y'all so much for being here. Thank you again, Olga. This has been great.
Yeah.
And if you need anything
Thanks,
in the
Leah.
meantime, don't hesitate to reach out. And you'll be getting a lot of information from me about all these resources, probably next Monday or Tuesday.
Cool.
Or whenever
Right.
Olga gets me the stuff. There's no rush.
Yeah. I'm going to get it. I'm going to get it to you today or tomorrow.
Okay.
Otherwise I'll forget.
Okay. All right, y'all. Well, that's in the chat. So feel free to grab that link and we will see you on the 4th, I hope.
Okay.